Okay, Abby is a pediatric occupational therapist at Good Nature Therapy Services in Aurora, Ohio. She is passionate about working alongside kiddos and their families to overcome adversity and work towards meaningful family goals. She obtained her master's degree in occupational therapy from Gannon University in Erie, Pennsylvania in 2019. Since obtaining licensure, Abby has practiced in pediatric settings, including school-based practice and outpatient clinic settings. Most of her professional experience has been spent supporting autistic youngsters as they develop life skills and explore meaningful play. Abby has always valued lifelong learning as much as she enjoys seeking new information and knowledge. She gets just as excited about presenting at conferences and sharing information with caregivers that could help others. So, without further ado, I will go ahead and kick it over to Abby. Thank you again, Abby, for doing this presentation for us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Teresa, for having me. And thank you all for joining today. Today, we're going to be talking about life skills for autism. And today's presentation is going to be pretty broad because we have a very broad audience. So there's lots of you who sent in questions who are parenting young kiddos, ages 5 and under. And we also have some caregivers on the call who are parenting an adult child who's living with them who are hoping to develop life skills for their children as well. So I'm hoping all of you, regardless of the age or stage that your child is at, will be able to walk away with some tangible key takeaways. I will breeze right through this because Teresa gave me a wonderful introduction, but I will share a little bit about my workplace. I currently work at Good Nature Therapy Services in Aurora, Ohio. We are a pediatric therapy provider. We have speech and language pathology services and occupational therapy services. I'm an occupational therapist, so that is my discipline that I'm coming from. And we currently service kiddos aged birth through 21 years old. The thing that sets Good Nature apart from other traditional therapy clinics is our mission, which is to increase access to outdoor and to nature experiences for children and their families. So we have about 1.5 acres in Aurora. We have a small indoor clinic, but unless it is dangerous weather, we are taking the majority of our therapy sessions outside and giving kids access to nature experiences to help promote skills in whatever their goal areas are for occupational therapy or speech therapy. Before we get started, I did want to highlight here a note on language. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using identity first language. So I'll be using phrases like autistic child or autistic adult. And I wanted to give you guys a heads up that I'm doing that intentionally based off of research that's coming out on preferences of autistic individuals in the United States specifically. So here we see a little pie chart that shows that 87% of autistic adults in this survey done in 2022 preferred that identity first, sometimes called identity affirming language. This is compared to that traditional person first language where we would say child with autism or person with autism. But I did want to recognize that this might differ from your personal preference or your family's preference on language. So I just wanted to let you guys know if I was having an individual conversation with you, I would certainly honor your language preferences. But for the sake of this being a larger presentation, we will be using that identity first language. And another note on recommendations, like I said, we have a very broad audience today. So we have caregivers, we have a couple teachers in the audience, and people who are parenting kids of all ages. So this content is going to be very broad. We're going to focus a lot on strategies that can be implemented regardless of your child's age and regardless of what your child's support needs are. So please keep in mind that not all of these recommendations may work for your child. What works for one individual may not work for another, and that's what makes all of our brains beautiful. But I want to encourage you guys as caregivers that you know your child best. So as you start to process this information that's shared in this presentation, I want you to trust your knowledge as a caregiver and lean into those instincts as you kind of make decisions about how to take what we're discussing today and begin implementing it in your home. For our agenda today, we are going to start by going over a brief introduction to occupational therapy. Some of you are probably familiar with occupational therapy, whether your child is currently receiving OT or has received it in the past. But because we have such a broad audience, learning a little bit about OT is going to be a key part of the presentation, as I'm hoping to kind of teach you guys how to think like an occupational therapist. So we'll be talking about something called activity analysis, which is how to recognize the steps of a task and know when to make it harder or easier. And then we're also going to talk about something called activities of daily living, which are our more basic life skills, versus instrumental activities of daily living, which are those more complex skills. We're then going to go into some tangible modifications and strategies that we can use to support participation in daily tasks. We do have some case studies at the end, but if we are short on time, I definitely want to leave time for questions, so we might skip over those depending on how close we are on time. So, what is occupational therapy? Occupational therapy is a profession that helps people complete the tasks that occupy their day. So, these are the things that people want to do and that are super meaningful to them. So, this could be things like hobbies, leisure activities, related activities like that, as well as things that we need to do. So, we need to be able to get dressed, prepare food for ourselves, use the bathroom, those daily required tasks. The wonderful thing about occupations, and when we start to analyze the things that occupy our day, is that they're very unique to each person. So for me, when I'm thinking about the things that I want to do and the things that I need to do, I am an occupational therapist for my job. I work outside all day, rain or shine. I love to watch The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, and I love to run marathons. And for some of you guys, as you think about your occupations, those three things probably sound absolutely horrible. You're like, there's no way I want to spend my day outside in the rain or watch reality TV or run a marathon. And that's what makes occupational therapy and occupations so fun and beautiful, is that everybody has different things that they need to do throughout their daily routines, and they have those different things that they want to do in those daily routines. So, as we as a group start to think how we encourage our children to participate in those activities, we are going to learn about creating a just right challenge when we teach those new skills. And this is what I'm hoping you guys are all going to be able to do after today's presentation. So, an activity analysis is the process of analyzing specific requirements of a task. As part of this process, we then figure out ways to make that task easier by downgrading the task or more difficult by upgrading the task. And we start to build those in to help create that just right challenge. That analysis is then compared to the needs of the individual, again, so that you can provide that just right challenge. So we're creating that balance where the task is not too difficult for a child so they get frustrated and give up, but it's also not so easy that no new skills are developed and no new skills are practiced. So this slide looks a little bit wild here, but this is an example of an activity analysis. So those of us who live independently, someone might say like, hey, could you do laundry? And for us who have been doing laundry independently for a while, we forget all of the different components that go into this seemingly basic task. But when we start to do an activity analysis, we see that there's a huge list of tasks and steps to that task. And really, we could break these down even further. So in the middle of the slide, I've outlined 12 steps to complete the task of doing laundry. From the very beginning, we have to have a system for gathering our dirty clothes and keeping them separate from our clean clothes. And then we have to go through all of these steps, putting the dirty clothes into the washing machine, finding laundry detergent, being able to select the appropriate settings, knowing when to move the laundry from the washer to the dryer, which I am certainly guilty of forgetting basically every time I do laundry. Starting the dryer on the appropriate settings, removing dry clothing from the dryer, folding laundry, putting laundry away. So those are pretty simple steps there. We could even get more nitty-gritty there and break those down even further. But in an activity analysis, that's that first step we take. We outline the steps of the task. And from there, we can brainstorm how the skills of our child line up with the demands of the activity. If it seems like these steps are too complicated for the individual, then we look at ways to downgrade that task. How can we make it easier? So we put on our investigator cap, we start brainstorming. Perhaps we use a smaller laundry basket to make sure that the load isn't too heavy and to make sure that when we're putting away laundry and folding it, there's less clothes, so it's going to take less time. We're going to be able to attend to that task a little bit longer. Maybe we teach our child to use a timer on their phone to ensure that laundry isn't left in the washer or dryer. So there are ways that we can brainstorm in an activity analysis to make a task easier. On the flip side, there's also things that we can brainstorm to make the task harder. So if your child is starting to master some of these steps, we can then brainstorm, okay, how can I upgrade this? My child is ready for that next step in this activity. What can I do to get them closer to full independence in this task? So we can start to think about allowing them to complete the task with less support from a caregiver. We could think about adding additional steps of the task. So if they're currently just moving the laundry from the washer to the dryer, let's start to build in extra steps. You could build in additional responsibilities like monitoring supplies and alerting caregivers when we're running low or running out of those supplies like laundry detergent. And then we could always get more complicated, like sorting clothes into lights or darks, sort clothing by type of washer or dryer needs, like delicates. So those are some examples in an activity analysis of how we look at a task and figure out how it compares to what our child's skills are so that we can brainstorm whether we need to make it easier or whether we're ready to make it more difficult. Knowing when to upgrade. So let's start brainstorming how to recognize whether your child is ready to make a task more difficult or to make a task easier. So knowing when to upgrade or knowing when to make a task more challenging. If the task is being completed quickly and very easily by your child, as well as if it's being completed with high accuracy. So if they don't need any support and they're completing it consistently correct time after time, they're probably ready to upgrade for some additional challenges in that task. Similarly, if it's completed with no support, so if I, as the caregiver or a supportive adult, am not helping them at all with that task, or if they're not relying on any external supports like a timer or a visual schedule, we're probably ready to upgrade that task. This last sign of knowing when to upgrade is very similar to knowing when to downgrade as well. So if the task is completed with decreased engagement, so there are times where our child might refuse to participate in an activity, and that could be for a multitude of reasons. It could be too hard. It could also be too easy. So if the challenge is not there, our child might not be engaged in that task. They might be a little bit bored at how easy that activity is, and therefore they may lack that engagement. Knowing when to downgrade. So these are our signs of knowing when to make a task easier for our child. If the task is completed with persistent or high levels of frustration or distress. So if our child is getting so upset that there are tears or we're starting to have a meltdown of some level, whether it's a high intensity and it's just happening once, or if it's happening repeated times during that activity, that's definitely a sign that we need to pull back and make that task easier, and provide more support. If not, just remove that demand and completing that task for our child. Second, if the task is not completed due to repeated failure or an inability to complete. So if your child is trying and trying and trying, but they're just not quite getting it right, that is a sign that they might need a little extra support by making that task easier. Similar to our last slide here, task is not completed due to avoidance, loss of engagement, or resistance. So that can be a sign that we see that, like we discussed, could be because the task is too easy. In this situation, we're discussing it that it might appear because the task is too hard. So we're going to see that frustration. I know I don't like to engage in an activity when I know that it's going to end in failure and that it's going to require a high effort from me. So that is a time where we start to see that avoidance and that loss of engagement in children, and in your child, whether they're a child or a young adult or an adult. So that's a time when we start to think about needing to downgrade the task and make it easier. If the task is completed with excessive and repetitive prompting. So if you're having to find yourself repeatedly giving the same verbal prompt or giving the same cue to your child, put your laundry away, put your laundry away, put your laundry away, put your laundry away. That is a sign that we might need to build in an extra support to help bridge that gap in that skill for that child. And lastly, task is completed but with physical fatigue or discomfort. So, if your child doesn't have the physical skills to complete that task yet, they might become physically uncomfortable or demonstrate fatigue, getting tired, muscle soreness. And that's also a sign that that task would be too difficult and that we need to shift it to make it a little bit more easy. So that's a little bit about activity analysis. Next, we're going to talk about what life skills to focus on first. This was a question that came from quite a few of our participants, knowing how to identify a task or a life skill that should be focused on first. And the most important point that I want to make on this slide is that this is going to be very specific to the individual. So it's going to be specific to your child's age, your child's skill level, and ultimately what the long-term goals are that you have for your child and that your child has for themselves. So we can start thinking about what things they need to be able to do that are currently challenging. So we can think about if it's a goal for your child to live totally independently and be able to drive themselves to the grocery store and complete all daily tasks by themselves, in an apartment by themselves, we are going to shift our goals quite a bit versus if your long-term goal for your child is maybe to have them be in a suite that's attached to your house. So those are the things I want you to start thinking about when you're thinking about what life skill to focus on teaching first. What are the long-term goals for your child? And ultimately, what does independence in those activities look like? In general, though, we're going to start focusing on our basic daily living skills or our ADLs before we start to focus on more complex daily tasks, which in the OT world we call instrumental activities of daily living or IADLs. So, what are ADLs? Activities of daily living are activities that are oriented towards taking care of our own body and that we tend to complete on a daily or a semi-daily basis. So, these typically are tasks that enable basic survival and or well-being. So, in the occupational therapy world, we consider these 8 things an activity of daily living. So, we look at bathing and showering, toileting and toilet hygiene, dressing, eating and swallowing, feeding, functional mobility, personal hygiene and grooming, and sexual activity. So these in the occupational therapy world are considered these more basic daily living skills. And these are the areas that we can tend to focus on first before we dive into our more complex daily living skills, which we call instrumental activities of daily living. So these are those more complex activities. Typically, they support daily life within the home or community, and they require more complex skills than those used in ADLs. You'll also notice a lot of these more complex tasks have to do with not only taking care of ourselves, but taking care of others and taking care of our environment. So we're looking at these areas. These are the areas that are identified in our occupational therapy framework, but we're looking at care of others, care of pets and animals, child rearing, communication management, driving and community mobility, financial management, home establishment and management, meal preparation and cleanup, religious and spiritual expression, safety and emergency maintenance, and shopping. As we start to think about activities of daily living, those more basic life skills, and instrumental activities of daily living, those more complex skills, we see a huge connection between the two and honestly a lot of overlap. So, this is where we start to think about what true independence looks like for these skills so that you can start to kind of upgrade as your child is ready for upgrading. So we can look at a basic life skill like toilet hygiene. That's one of our basic ADLs. And we can think about not only do I need to be able to use the bathroom and maintain toilet hygiene for hygiene and safety, but I also eventually need to figure out how to keep track of how many rolls of toilet paper I have left. I need to be able to change the toilet paper roll when it's empty. If I'm out of toilet paper, I may need to get myself to the store to purchase toilet paper or have the resources to set up like an Amazon subscription and an auto delivery. So we see how all of those skills, even though we can start with that basic living skill of toileting and toilet hygiene, it starts to branch off into those more complex daily living skills. And those are some of the ways that you can start to think about how to upgrade the task when you're doing an activity analysis for your child. So now we're going to dive into some common modifications for daily tasks. So I want you to take a moment, think about some of those daily living skills that you might want to focus on first for your child, and think about how we could potentially build these modifications in to support your child in participating in that task. So our first modification is task lists. And task lists break down the steps of a task into easy to understand steps. So this could be in the form of a visual sequence like the one you see on the slide here, but it could also be in the form of a written list. So the one on the slide, we actually have the written instructions as well as the visuals, but we have a task list here for washing hands. So we see each step: turn on sink, put soap on hands, rub hands for 20 seconds, rinse hands. Again, you could make this easier or more challenging depending on your child's needs. So you could add on dry hands or put paper towel in the garbage can, whatever skills your child is ready for, you can build that into this task list. The way I like to use task lists is by laminating them and keeping them near the area that the task is completed in. So for some tasks, you can even use like a wet erase marker or a dry erase marker and have your child check off the tasks or the steps of the task as they move through it, just as a visual support for where they're at within that activity. If you don't have access to lamination at home, you can use packaging tape and just like carefully lay it down sticky side up, place your task list within it, and then do another layer of packaging tape on top. And that is a good way to kind of get something to be a little bit more sturdy and have it last longer, instead of just an unlaminated piece of paper, but without having access to lamination. Our next common modification is use of timers. So we all probably use the timers on our cell phones or on our Apple Watch pretty regularly. But there's also a multitude of other timers out there to be purchased that can be used for supporting participation in daily life skills. We frequently think about timers as a way of counting down, preparing our child for a transition of some sort, but we can also use them to help us count upwards during a task for a task where we need to sustain attention. So we can think about scrubbing hands for 20 seconds. Since COVID, I basically always count to myself when I'm washing my hands. So for our child, we might look into building in a timer system for those tasks where there's a specific time frame. The other example I have on this slide is washing a dish for 15 seconds. So as you start to think about how to develop these skills with your child, you can think about tasks where your child might be prone to just like rushing through it, but we need to start building that attention so we're completing the task more thoroughly, like washing a dish. It's super easy to just like wipe, 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 put it wherever it's going in the drying rack. But we might want to start building up that duration of, okay, well, to get it as clean as it should be to eat off of again, I probably need to wash this for 15 seconds. So we can also use timers in that way to support sustained attention. And there are a ton of different timers depending on your child's learning style. So on the left, we have a more traditional timer that shows the time that's left or the time that we're counting up to. And then we also have more visual timers if your child is a visual learner. So we have the one that shows the red space with how much time is left in the white. We have sand timers so that a child can see how much sand is left, and that correlates with the time. And then we also have ones that have flashing lights or different sound features, again, for children who are visual learners or who respond well to an auditory cue. Another common modification, this one's similar to our task list, but use of visual schedules. So a visual schedule typically is used for a more general routine. So it could be used for a morning routine or an evening routine, or it could be used for an individual's whole day. And similar to a task list, there's lots of different variations. So on the left, we see an example of a column with to do and a column with all done. The way that this one would work is you have a visual icon tied to each step within the routine. As your child moves through that routine, they move that visual from the to do column to the done column. And those are attached with Velcro. A similar system in the middle, we have almost like a flipbook system. So we still have those visual icons, but as your child completes those steps of that routine, they close the flap so that they don't see the visual icon anymore. They know that they're ready to move to the next step. A visual schedule could also be more similar to a task list where it's written and there isn't a visual support. So especially if your child has strong reading skills or if they are proficient in writing, you can help your child and they can help you to make that list. If we can get our child to participate in the activity, participate in making the routine and the list, we're going to see higher buy-in to actually participate in that activity. Another common modification here is to support sensory-based needs. And this one's really important. So I want to encourage you guys to seek to understand your child's unique sensory characteristics and look for ways to support those needs within daily living tasks. So a lot of times when we think about daily living skills, there are a lot of sensory rich experiences going on that are tied to those. So when we're thinking about toileting and toilet hygiene, that's very obvious. If we're in a public restroom, there might be different smells, there might be loud noises of an automatic toilet or an automatic sink. If we're thinking about doing laundry, the temperature of warm laundry, the different textures of the clothing items that we're touching. So a lot of the daily living skills we're talking about today might actually have some challenging aspects to them from a sensory perspective for your child. So we should always seek to prioritize regulation, making sure our child is regulated before we place any type of expectation or demand on our child. When our brains and our nervous systems are regulated, they're more ready to learn, they're ready to participate, versus when we get dysregulated, that's when we can start to get into that fight, flight, or freeze response. And we're not going to be ready for new learning of new skills, or participating in those daily living activities. So these are just some very basic opportunities. I outlined if your child is a sensory seeker, if they tend to seek out lots of those sensory rich experiences, you can look for opportunities for flexible seating or movement. So looking for life skills that can be completed while standing, like doing dishes or doing the laundry where you're carrying that heavy weighted load. Allowing for multisensory experiences, so playing music during activities, or maybe we're going to sing the steps instead of just reading the steps of the task, and incorporating heavy work into routines. Heavy work is a type of regulating input. It is a type of activity where we're pushing or pulling against a weighted load or working against some type of resistance. So as an adult, like I love to go to the gym and lift weights because that is heavy work. My nervous system loves it. It helps to regulate me It helps me to stay focused and to keep a calm body. So, very similarly, we can look for ways to build in heavy work into these daily life tasks. So, we can look into activities like carrying laundry up the steps in a washing or in a laundry basket. Those are opportunities that we can build heavy work into our tasks to make sure we're supporting our children to be regulated. On the flip side, if your child is a sensory avoider, we can look for ways to avoid specific triggers, such as loud noises. So there are ways that we can brainstorm to avoid these triggers. Sometimes they can't be avoided, though. So what we can brainstorm is ways to accommodate. So is there a way to adjust the task or adjust the environment? So can we turn the lights down a little bit? Could we play a white noise machine to block out some other extra noises? But we can also accommodate through adaptive equipment like noise blocking headphones. So, all of these ways are strategies that we can support our children to be regulated before we expect them to participate in a life skill. Another common modification is organization. So we can use systems like color coding or labeling to organize materials, organize our physical space, as well as organize the task to support executive function skills. So executive function skills are our brain's higher level thinking skills. So things like our ability to sustain attention to our task, our ability to take perspective with others, to initiate a task or to end the task when we actually complete it. Those are all executive functions that are required for daily living skills. So on the left, we see an example of organization. This is actually from like a play kitchen area, but the exact same system could be applied in a real kitchen where we have visual labels with a word and a picture so that we know where everything goes in that cabinet. So we're thinking about supporting that task of doing dishes, right? We know exactly where the dishes go, but we can also think about that task of meal prep. I know exactly where to find all of the dishes that I might need to prepare a meal. On the right, we see an example of a hanging clothes organizer. And this caregiver put days of the week on there. So they prepped their outfits for the whole week so that throughout the week, their child could just grab the outfit and get ready themselves in the morning. I've also recommended to caregivers to do like bathroom bins. So if your child is doing a morning routine and an evening routine and you're trying to build independence within those tasks, having like a morning bathroom bin with any supplies that you need and an evening bathroom bin. So that's especially a good tool. Like if your child is starting to wear makeup or if they're starting to wash their face or do deodorant as we get into those puberty and teenage years. It can be a really great support to have all of our morning supplies where we are maybe putting on makeup or putting on deodorant versus our evening supplies where maybe we're taking makeup off or washing our face. And we're starting to see those differences between morning routine and evening routine. Use of choice is another great strategy to increase independence in tasks, but also really great strategy for increasing motivation. I know I am always more apt to participate in an activity when I have a little bit of free will and a little bit of choice over what I'm doing. So we can do that for our children in daily life skills by providing opportunities for choice. So I've outlined a choice board on the slide here that has three options. And then there's a spot in the bottom where the child can select the choice that they make. So we can use a choice board just like that to complete one individual task. So out of these three tasks, I'm selecting to complete just this one. You can also use this though to choose the order of tasks that are completed. So if it's expected of your child to complete those three tasks, take out the trash, do dishes, and wipe the table, you could have your child select, okay, I'm going to take the trash out first. Now I have two options left. Which one of those two options would I like to do next? So there's two different ways that you can use choice boards. One, you can use them to select an order of tasks or to just select that individual isolated task. And use of routine. So, establishing consistent and predictable routines for daily activities can really help to increase participation, especially if you know that your child is someone who really thrives on routine and predictability. This is one that you can start to build in more heavily. If your child is not super reliant on routine or predictability, you can start to build in a routine but follow it more loosely, depending on what works best for your family. And you can also, as we build in these routines, incorporate our other modifications that we've discussed today to support participation in that routine. So, using a visual schedule or a timer within the routine that we're establishing. So, a very common question that came in from most participants was how to increase motivation. So, lots of people saying, I just cannot get my child to participate. They're so resistant to try this new task or to participate in this task. And I hope that what we've talked about already up to this point has helped you guys to connect the dots on ways you can downgrade the task but still have your child be an active participant without just taking that task from them and doing it for them completely. So, some ways that we can increase motivation, we can look at two different types: internal motivation, which is sometimes called intrinsic motivation. This is our drive to engage in an activity for inherent satisfaction, enjoyment, or personal fulfillment versus external motivation, which is sometimes called extrinsic motivation. This is our human drive to engage in an activity because of external rewards or punishments. So, we're going to go into some examples of what each of these look like in real life. But in general, all humans learn best and therefore participate best. And we're more likely to stay engaged in tasks when we're internally motivated. So, when we have that drive to engage in a task just for that satisfaction or enjoyment, personal fulfillment, we're way more likely to participate and stay engaged in that task versus when we use external motivators. So, some examples of what these motivators could look like: an internal motivation, a desire for independence. So, really encouraging that desire for independence in your child is a way to increase internal motivation. Similarly, a sense of mastery or competence. So, pride in the work that your child does. And this goes a long way when we think about how picky we are with our children as they participate in daily tasks. So we really want to think about, like, if your child did a task and it's the first time they did it with less support from you, even if it looks horrible or it's really done incorrectly, we can look at that as a way to foster pride and encourage our children. Like, look what you did. You should be so proud of this. This is incredible. And then maybe after they go to bed, you fix it a little bit. But in general, we want to develop that pride to increase that motivation. Similarly, curiosity and exploration. So if there's a time where your child is just curious about a task, looking to see what you're doing, that's a way to increase motivation. Personal preference or enjoyment. So if your child has specific special interests, we can harness those to increase internal motivation. And that desire for routine and predictability. So, especially our children who are more apt to rely on routine and predictability, that can be a huge source of internal motivation for those individuals. External motivators are going to be like when we use a first then statement. So, like, first wash the dishes, then you can have TV time. That is an external motivator. So, we're working for an external reward. Similarly, praise and encouragement. So if we are reliant on getting praise or encouragement after we do a task, that's an external motivator as well. Sticker or token systems. So if we have a system set up where, you can think about, okay, I did each day that you do the dishes this week, you get a sticker. And once you earn so many stickers, you can turn it in for a prize. That is a sticker chart or a token system. That is an external motivator. Avoiding a negative consequence. So if there's some sort of punishment associated with not doing the task, that's going to act as an external motivator. On the flip side, earning privileges. Competition actually is an external motivator. So, if you have a child who really loves competition, because it's not necessarily an internal drive for themselves to complete it, it's comparing themselves to a peer or another person to complete it. That's actually considered an external motivator as well. And positive attention. So, that's very similar to that praise and encouragement. So, what I want to highlight, especially though, is when we're thinking about ways to motivate our children, internal motivation is the ultimate goal. However, as we're starting to develop that, we may have to use some of these external motivators to develop these initial skills with our child. So, I want you to keep that in mind as you're thinking about ways to increase motivation for your child specifically in your home. Um, Strive for internal motivation. We know that research suggests that that's the most effective way to promote long-term development of skills that actually lasts throughout a child's life and increases our attention to tasks. But if your child is not quite there, they don't have that internal motivation, that's when we can start to trial some of these external motivators. But ways to increase internal motivation. So, like we discussed, allowing opportunities for choice, that's a great way to increase internal motivation for children. Fostering confidence and pride in work. So, we talked about this. Even when it isn't done perfectly, try to encourage your child, prompt them that they should feel proud of that work and be confident in what they produced. Incorporating preferred or motivating items. So, listening to your favorite music while you do a task. Um, that can increase that internal motivation as well. We can also look at ways to link assigned chores to special interests. So, an example, if your child loves animals, let's look at maybe assigning them some pet care duties. So, we can look at what your child's special interests are and try to brainstorm, is there a way that I can harness that to increase internal motivation during a daily life skill? And lastly, help them reflect and notice feelings of accomplishment and celebrate together. So, this is tied really closely to that fostering confidence and pride in work, but looking for little things that we can celebrate and get coming together as a family to celebrate those accomplishments, whether big or small, goes a long way in fostering that internal motivation. We had a couple other questions regarding tools or apps to support participation. So we've talked a lot about those modifications that we can use, but I did want to highlight some more tech-focused resources that can be utilized, especially for children who are like late elementary into middle and high school age or our young adults. We can start to look at some of these technology-based supports to support participation. So smart speakers like Alexa or Google Nest, these are really great resources because they have so many tools built into them. So we can look at them as a tool to use for timers. We can also look at them to give us reminders for when to complete tasks. We can use them to play music to increase motivation, give step-by-step directions, or even asking questions about how to complete daily living skills. So you can use Alexa, like, hey, Alexa, how do I make rice? How do I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? And she will tell us how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. So there are a lot of great ways to use those smart speakers to support that participation in daily life skills. Similarly, smartwatches, so we can look to program our child's smartwatch if they have one to support participation in daily routines. So using reminders or timers within those smartwatches to support participation. We also have apps like Google Keep or Apple Notes that support use of checklists. So we can build checklists right into our child's phone or our child's tablet and use those checklists, which then our child can click on them and check it off as they go through. So that can be used in some ways like a task list, but it can also be used as a visual schedule if you take photos of the steps and kind of upload them into that checklist.
I just want to ask a question, and I think you are just
Yeah.
about to get to this, but there was a question in the chat. Do you have any resources that are free for task lists that we can download, print, and laminate?
Yes, yeah. So I typically will just use like Microsoft Word and or Google Docs, whatever you have access to. And I like to take photos of the steps as I do them just with my phone. So there are resources out there that you can use, like this classroomscreen.com. You can make to-do lists and task lists on there. But if I'm looking to add photos, I typically just use like a Word document and I'll either Google image search for like a clip art or I'll use an actual photo that I took. And I'll just make the list within that and then print it. Any other questions in the chat, Teresa? I can't see it, the chat while I'm screen sharing.
That was the main one at this point.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, so this classroomscreen.com, this is a website that allows you to add widgets to the screen. So it's like one big computer screen, but you can add a timer and drag and drop where you want the timer to be, or a to-do list, or a clock. So you can pull in different tools that might support your child in completing a task and having them all on one screen. And then another technology-based tool that you can look into using is video modeling. So if your child has a smartphone or has a tablet, or even if they just want to use your smartphone or tablet, you can look at taking videos of yourself or your child completing the task, and then use those videos to teach and model the steps of the activity. So this is a great way for your child to be able to reference back. Oh, what's the next step of this task? I can play the video, I can pause it when I need to make sure I'm following the steps correctly. There's a lot of also really great research that supports use of video modeling, especially when an individual is seeing themselves complete the task, whether it's with support from an adult or not, that we are then more apt to use those skills when we're completing that task in real life. So if we're able to get one video of your child completing that task with you kind of narrating the steps or providing support, we can use that as a resource to continue teaching independence in that activity. Um, we'll go through one of these case studies. So we have a case study here. Jill, who is a 26-year-old female living with her parents. Jill currently requires one-on-one support and occasional physical assistance, so physical help, to complete all daily routines and activities. Her caregivers would like her to begin developing more independence. If you were Jill's caregiver, what skill area would you focus on developing first? We have four options here. A is shopping, create a grocery list and go shopping. B is dressing, get dressed for a morning routine. C is money management, opening a bank account and transferring funds. And D is pet care, adopting a pet to develop skills. So I'll give you guys a moment to kind of think through your answers to yourself, or you can send them in the chat. And then we'll reveal our answer in just a moment. So the
I've got
answer for this
one.
one,
I was
oh,
going to
sorry.
say I got one answer. B is one guess.
Amazing. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Yes, the answer is B, dressing. And when we're thinking about the reason behind this answer and why this answer is the correct one, we're thinking about selecting those basic versus complex living skills. So dressing is the most basic task out of these four options. So if Jill doesn't have that skill yet, we can look to developing that skill first before looking at those more complex skills. Jill's caregivers have decided to start supporting dressing, so they work with her to set out her outfit the night before. They worked with Jill's OT to develop a visual sequence for the steps of getting dressed. And in the morning, they give Jill a verbal reminder to initiate her dressing routine. After that, though, they leave her alone to use her visual schedule. So, what are some things that Jill's caregivers might look out for to know that they need to downgrade this task further? So, what are those signs that they're looking for that this task might be a little too difficult for Jill? Again, you guys can just think of some answers, think of those signs to yourself, or you could send them in the chat.
Frustration is in the chat.
Yes.
Frustration again.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge one for knowing when to downgrade. So these are some other ones. We saw that frustration. Jill becomes frustrated and distressed while dressing. Some other signs that we could look for, Jill emerges from her room and her clothes are on incorrectly. So maybe they're on inside out or backwards. But if we're not completing that task successfully, that visual schedule probably isn't working for us. It probably needs to be tweaked, or we need to increase the supports, maybe give some prompting to go to the next step, or give some physical assistance. Another sign, Jill takes 30 minutes to get herself dressed. So that is way too long. We want to be, if we're taking that long to get dressed, we should be stepping in to support our child, or else, again, we're going to get to that point of frustration. And similarly, they check on Jill, and after 10 minutes, she has not begun getting dressed. So if we have supported our child with that visual schedule, we've given them that verbal prompt to initiate the dressing routine, but after a few minutes, they still have not started, that's a time we need to step in and provide a little extra support. So that is another example of a sign that we could look for to know when to downgrade that task further. And we'll skip over this one just for the sake of time. But any questions for today? I will stop sharing my screen or see if I can pull up the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question or send it in the chat. Also, I wanted to put my contact information. So if you guys had any questions for me that you think of after today's presentation, I can be reached at abby@goodnatureohio.com. You can also scan that QR code on the left, and it should connect you to my inbox, like pop up an email to send to me. And then on the right, I have a QR code to our website if you want to learn more about Good Nature Therapy Services. You could also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Good Nature Ohio.
There is one question I'm going to follow up with her individually because it's kind of specific. But for you, Abby, do you take county family dollars? You know what I'm talking about? How kind every county can give families some funding to use for different therapies or adapted products. Do you at Good Nature take those dollars?
We don't take them for therapy services, but what we do is if we have an existing client who has access to those county funds, we can provide recommendations for that adaptive equipment that can be used at home, and then caregivers kind of support that process with the county to get those funds as well.